I've been reading Dr. Meera Shah's You're the Only One I've Told, which is a collection of real life stories regarding pregnancy and abortion. And a few takeaways I've gotten from it so far is that trust and education is incredibly important, as well as the fact that no two pregnancies are alike. But also, it made me realize, when you put yourself in the shoes of these people and you understand what they're going through and the decisions that they have to make, the most ethical thing that we can do is to allow people a choice regarding their pregnancy. And here's why. For example, I used to attack people who decided to abort for financial reasons because I believed at the time that you could simply trust God to provide everything, or that you could simply put the child up for adoption, or that they were just simply convenience abortions, which I think is a dishonest term after having looked into it further. Because if you study the issue and the statistics, you find that about 1 in every 4 women in this country will have an abortion within their lifetime. But half of all people who are receiving an abortion have already given birth before. And about 72% of people receiving an abortion are what are considered low income or living below the poverty level. And when you realize that, and you realize that if you are a single parent living below the poverty line, well, what kind of job are you working? Most of them are likely working service jobs. And then you look into protections for pregnant people, like when it comes to keeping their job after they give birth and they need time off of work. Well, we just don't have strong enough protections for pregnant people in this country. It's very easy to lose your job, and if you are below the poverty line, you don't have any means of legal recourse. You're screwed. And notwithstanding the costs of a childbirth as well, that costs thousands of dollars. So if you're a single parent living below the poverty line and you're pregnant, you have to consider, do I protect the children I already have, or do I risk their livelihood for another child? And that's not just your job, that can be your house as well. And if you lose your housing, well, what happens to your children? Do they become homeless too? Do you raise them in a car or on the streets? Or do they get taken into foster care or become wards of the state? And when you look into that and you realize that the statistics regarding foster care, it's horrible. The foster care system has a higher rate of PTSD than veterans do. You'll find that the graduation rate on average in the US drops from 80% for students who are not in foster care to 50% for students who are in foster care. And then you'll find that the rate of poverty increases as well. When you look at poverty statistics, about 4% of all people with bachelor degrees are living below the poverty level. When it comes to just having a high school degree or not even having a high school degree, it goes to 25%. This is important because about 95% of all abortions in the US come from an unintended pregnancy. And which demographics have the highest level of unintended pregnancies? It's people who are uneducated and people who are living below the poverty line. Now, we have seen the abortion rate decline in the US in the past, such as when the Affordable Care Act was passed, which resulted in increased contraceptive access for people of lower incomes, which meant fewer unintended pregnancies, which meant fewer abortions. But what's really interesting is that a lot of pro-life activists do not like to believe that the pro-life movement is meant to control women. But it is really hard not to believe that when you look at their voting record and what they believe. When it comes to control, I think about it a lot in that, like, if you say that you're offering people freedom but you only give them one viable choice, is that a form of control? And I believe it is. And it has me thinking about when Henry Hyde passed the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funds for abortions. He said that he knew that he couldn't stop rich people from having abortions, but he could stop poor people from having abortions. Well, if we have an environment where it is becoming more and more expensive and difficult to afford to raise children, where we have both families working to pay rent now because necessities have gone up so much in price, how is it that if you risk homelessness by having a child, how is that not a form of control? How is it that by not providing a person with their right to choose regarding their pregnancy, how is that not a form of control if they risk homelessness by having another child, if they risk their own children's futures by having another child, or if we don't allow them to have access to things that they need, such as health care, such as child care, such as paid maternity leave, all things that would provide people with the ability to care for their own families? How is that not a form of control?